But just as hope seemed within reach, the final twist came. A discovery, one that would shake the nation's very foundation. Hidden deep within old government archives, a long-buried secret was uncovered. A truth about the country's past, one that had been forgotten or deliberately erased. Historians, journalists, and citizens alike struggled to make sense of it. What did it mean? Who had known? And most importantly, how would the country move forward now, knowing what had been kept in the dark for so long? The revelation did not break the country, but it did force a reckoning. The final test was not about war, disease, or political battles. It was about truth. Could the nation face itself, accept its past, and still move forward? The answer was not clear. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like the country was ready to find out. The story of America was not over. It was only turning the page to its next chapter. The truth, long buried and forgotten, had finally come to light. At first, it caused shock, disbelief, and anger. People questioned how something so significant had been hidden for so long. Some refused to accept it, while others felt vindicated, as if the weight of generations had finally been acknowledged. The country stood still, staring at the pages of its own past, unsure of what to do next. But then something changed. Instead of pushing it aside, people began to confront it. It wasn't easy, accepting hard truths never is, but the conversation had begun. Leaders, historians, and everyday citizens debated what this revelation meant for the future. Would it divide the country even further, or could it serve as a moment of reckoning, a chance to grow? Schools added new lessons to their history books, making sure that future generations wouldn't be left in the dark. Families sat together at dinner tables, discussing the past in ways they never had before. It wasn't about rewriting history, it was about finally seeing it in full. As the country processed the truth, something unexpected happened. The divisions that had seemed impossible to bridge just years before started to shift. Not completely, not suddenly, but in small ways that mattered. People began to realize that no single person or group had all the answers. That their struggles, though different, were connected. The country had spent so long arguing about who was right and who was wrong that it had forgotten to listen. Now, for the first time in a long time, people were starting to hear each other. The economy, once in turmoil, slowly found its footing again. New industries emerged, jobs returned, and communities that had been abandoned were rebuilt with new purpose. Technology, which had once fueled so much division, became a tool for education and connection. Misinformation still existed, but people became more aware, questioning what they saw instead of simply accepting it. A new generation of leaders rose, not just in politics, but in business, in activism, in everyday life. They were shaped by the struggles of their time, determined to do things differently. The scars of the past did not disappear, but they became lessons instead of open wounds. People still disagreed because in a country as vast and diverse as the United States, disagreement was inevitable. But the difference was that now more people were willing to have real conversations rather than just shouting across the divide. There was no perfect ending, no sudden moment where everything was fixed. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the strength of the country had never been about being perfect. Maybe it. The officer blinked, his confidence wavering for the first time. The jurors, who had been so sure of the case just moments ago, were now exchanging uneasy glances. The judge leaned forward slightly, now fully invested. The woman continued, "You thought you were testifying against just another civilian, didn't you?" She asked, shaking her head. "You thought I'd be too scared, too intimidated to fight back. But what you didn't realize is that I've spent my entire career facing threats far worse than you." The officer shifted uncomfortably, but she wasn't finished. "You lied under oath," she said plainly. "And I can prove it with one simple piece of evidence that will expose everything." The officer's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to argue, to deny, but something told him it wouldn't matter. Because for the first time since this case started, he wasn't the one in control. And that's when everything changed. This sets up an intense, suspenseful introduction while keeping the story engaging, human-centric, and in line with YouTube's content policies. Let me know if you want any tweaks. The tension in the courtroom was almost suffocating. The officer, who had stood so confidently just moments ago, now looked like he was struggling to keep his composure. His fingers tightened around the paper in his hand, but it was clear he had lost control of the moment. The murmurs in the audience grew louder as people processed what had just happened. A Navy SEAL? No one had expected that. Commander Alex Carter remained standing, her expression steady. She wasn't trying to intimidate him, not in an obvious way. But the way she carried herself, the way she met his gaze without hesitation, made it clear she wasn't afraid of him or the lies he had told. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, calling for order. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice measured, "you claim you have evidence proving the officer's testimony is false." "Yes, Your Honor," she replied smoothly, "and I will be happy to present it." The officer cleared his throat, forcing a chuckle as if to brush off the moment. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is ridiculous. She's just trying to create doubt where there is none." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" Her lawyer stepped forward, setting a file on the table. "Your Honor, before we move forward, I'd like to request that this officer verify something for us." He turned to the officer. "You were the arresting officer in this case, correct?" The officer nodded stiffly. "Yes." "You claim my client was caught in the act." "Correct." "And that there was clear evidence tying her to the crime." "Absolutely." Alex exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "That's interesting," she said, "because that's not what the security footage shows." The room went completely silent. The officer's face twitched, just for a second, but it was enough. The lawyer slid a USB drive across the table. "Your Honor, this contains the full, unedited surveillance footage from the night in question. Footage that, for some reason, wasn't included in the police report." The judge frowned, adjusting his glasses. "Why wasn't this submitted earlier?" The lawyer smiled slightly. "Because, Your Honor, we didn't have it until now. Someone tried to make sure this footage never saw the light of day." The officer shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. Alex didn't take her eyes off him. She could see the cracks forming, the way his breathing had changed, the way he kept glancing at the judge, as if silently pleading for this to stop. But it was too late. The judge sighed and motioned toward the bailiff. "Let's take a look at this footage." The bailiff took the USB, walking it over to the courtroom screen. As he plugged it in, Alex folded her arms, waiting. She had already seen the footage. She knew exactly what was on it. And more importantly, she knew what asterisk wasn't asterisk. The screen flickered to life, and the courtroom watched as the footage played. The timestamp was clear. This was from the exact time the alleged crime took place. They saw the location, the empty alley, the quiet street. But there was one glaring issue. Alex Carter was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the footage showed something completely different. A man dressed similarly to Alex, moving quickly through the shadows. The grainy quality of the camera could have made it easy to mistake him for someone else, if someone asterisk wanted asterisk to make that mistake. The officer's face paled. The judge leaned forward. "I don't see the defendant in this footage." Alex's lawyer nodded. "Exactly." A hush fell over the room. People exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. The jury members, who had seemed so certain before, were now visibly shaken. Alex finally spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "You accused me of a crime I didn't commit," she said, her eyes locked onto the officer. "You said you had solid evidence, but this footage tells a different story." The officer's mouth opened, then closed. He had no words. Alex tilted her head slightly. "Now here's what I find interesting," she continued. "If I wasn't there, then that means someone else was." She took a step closer, lowering her voice just enough to make him feel the weight of her words. "So tell me, officer, who were you really covering for?" The officer clenched his jaw, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. "I." Before he could say another word, the judge raised a hand. "I think we need a recess," he said. "We'll reconvene shortly." The gavel came down, and the courtroom erupted in conversation. Spectators whispered, jury members exchanged glances, and the officer, well, he looked like a man who had just realized his perfect plan had started to crumble. Alex didn't move. She stood still, watching him, studying him. She had been trained to recognize weakness, to spot deception, and right now this man was radiating both. He wasn't just lying. He was hiding something much bigger. And now the real question wasn't just about proving her innocence. It was about finding out what, or asterisk who asterisk, he was trying so desperately to protect. As soon as the judge called for recess, the courtroom burst into a flurry of movement. Lawyers whispered urgently, jurors exchanged uncertain glances, and spectators murmured among themselves, trying to make sense of what they had just seen. But in the middle of all the chaos, Alex Carter remained still. She wasn't distracted by the noise, the shifting energy, or even the officer who had just been caught in a lie. She was focused. She watched as the officer turned away, stiffly adjusting his belt as he walked toward the back of the courtroom. His hands were balled into fists, his shoulders tense. He hadn't expected this. He had been so sure that his story would go unchallenged, that she would break under pressure, that no one would dare question a decorated officer's word. But he had underestimated her. Alex took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay patient. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. There was something deeper at play here. She could feel it. Lies like this didn't happen in isolation. Someone had wanted her behind bars. Someone had taken careful steps to make sure she was the one blamed. And whoever it was, they had used this officer as a tool to make it happen. Her lawyer leaned in close. "He's rattled," he murmured. "You saw the way he reacted to the footage. He wasn't just caught off guard, he was scared." Alex nodded, keeping her voice low. "Because he knows this is bigger than just him. He wasn't acting alone." Her lawyer frowned. "You think there's someone else behind this?" "I know there is," she said. "The question is, who?" Before her lawyer could respond, a voice cut through the noise. "Miss Carter." She turned to see a woman approaching. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, professional but with an air of authority that set her apart from the rest of the spectators. Alex immediately recognized her. Internal affairs. The woman stopped just a few feet away, giving Alex a measured look. "Can we talk?" Alex exchanged a glance with her lawyer before nodding. "Of course. If I wasn't there, then that means someone else was." She took a step closer, lowering her voice just enough to make him feel the weight of her words. "So tell me, officer, who were you really covering for?" The officer clenched his jaw, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. "I." Before he could say another word, the judge raised a hand. "I think we need a recess," he said. "We'll reconvene shortly." The gavel came down, and the courtroom erupted in conversation. Spectators whispered, Jury members exchanged glances, and the officer, well, he looked like a man who had just realized his perfect plan had started to crumble. Alex didn't move. She stood still, watching him, studying him. She had been trained to recognize weakness, to spot deception, and right now this man was radiating both. He wasn't just lying. He was hiding something much bigger. And now the real question wasn't just about proving her innocence. It was about finding out what, or asterisk who asterisk, he was trying so desperately to protect. As soon as the judge called for recess, the courtroom burst into a flurry of movement. Lawyers whispered urgently, jurors exchanged uncertain glances, and spectators murmured among themselves, trying to make sense of what they had just seen. But in the middle of all the chaos, Alex Carter remained still. She wasn't distracted by the noise, the shifting energy, or even the officer who had just been caught in a lie. She was focused. She watched as the officer turned away, stiffly adjusting his belt as he walked toward the back of the courtroom. His hands were balled into fists, his shoulders tense. He hadn't expected this. He had been so sure that his story would go unchallenged, that she would break under pressure, that no one would dare question a decorated officer's word. But he had underestimated her. Alex exhaled slowly. Be careful. She had heard those words countless times in the military. But somehow this felt different. There was no battlefield, no war zone, just a system that was supposed to be fair, supposed to protect the innocent. And yet, here she was, fighting to clear her name from a setup she still didn't fully understand. Just as she locked her phone, a sudden knock at her door made her spin around, her muscles tensing. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she grabbed her weapon and moved silently toward the peephole. Standing outside was someone she didn't expect, Detective Ryan Graves. Alex frowned, slipping the gun out of sight before unlocking the door. As soon as she opened it, Graves stepped inside quickly, glancing out the window before shutting the door behind him. His usual calm demeanor was gone. He looked tense, his jaw tight. "You're being followed," he said, his voice low. Alex crossed her arms. "Yeah, I figured that out." Graves turned to face her, his expression serious. "You need to leave town. Now." Alex narrowed her eyes. "That's not happening." "I'm serious, Carter," Graves insisted. "I've been digging into your case, and it's worse than I thought. The officer who lied on the stand, he wasn't acting alone. And whoever's behind this, they aren't just trying to frame you. They're trying to make sure you disappear." Alex held his gaze, searching for any sign that he was exaggerating. He wasn't. She kept her voice steady. "Who are we dealing with?" Grace hesitated. "I don't know yet, but someone high up. Someone with enough power to manipulate the system." He ran a hand through his hair, glancing toward the window again. "The thing is, it's not just about framing you anymore. If they wanted you in prison, that video footage wouldn't have leaked. But it did, which means someone inside their circle screwed up." Alex's mind was already working through the possibilities. If someone had messed up, that meant there were cracks in their operation, and cracks could be exploited. She took a step closer. "Then we find the weak link." Graves let out a dry laugh. "You really don't scare easy, do you?" "Not when the truth is on my side," Alex said firmly. Graves hesitated, then sighed. "All right, but you need to be smart about this. If we go after them the wrong way, they'll shut us down before we get close." Alex nodded. "Then we don't give them a chance." Just then, her phone buzzed again. She glanced down at the screen. Asterisk asterisk unknown number asterisk asterisk. She answered, her voice steady. "Carter." A familiar voice came through the line, her contact. But he sounded different this time. There was tension in his tone. "Alex, we've got a problem," he said. "I ran the plate on that SUV. It's registered to a shell company. No real owner, no history. But the name attached to it, that's where it gets interesting." Alex's grip on the phone tightened. "Who?" There was a pause. Then he said a name that sent a chill through her. It was someone she knew. Someone she had trusted. Someone who had been helping her fight this case from the beginning. Her lawyer. For a moment, everything around her seemed to go quiet. Her lawyer, her one ally in all of this, was connected to the people trying to frame her. Graves must have seen the shift in her expression. "What is it?" Alex slowly lowered the phone, her mind racing. "I think we just found the weak link." Graves frowned. "Who?" She looked him in the eye, her voice steady but cold. "My lawyer." Graves inhaled sharply. "You're sure?" Alex nodded. "I need to find out how deep he's in." Graves thought for a moment before speaking. If he's involved, then he knows we're on to them, which means we don't have much time. Alex took a breath. "Then we make our move now." The stakes had just skyrocketed. She wasn't just fighting to clear her name anymore. She was fighting to survive. Alex's pulse hammered as she and Detective Graves raced toward a deserted warehouse on the edge of town. A meeting place arranged with her now exposed lawyer. The night was cold and heavy with anticipation. Every step Alex took reminded her of the years of training as a Navy SEAL, a past filled with high-stakes operations and moments when every second counted. Tonight, the stakes were even higher as she prepared to confront the man she had trusted with her defense and ultimately her life. The officer hesitated. For a brief second, it looked like he might actually answer. But then, as if snapping back to reality, he shook his head. "You don't get it," he muttered. "Some things you don't come back from." Before she could push him further, he turned sharply and walked out of the courtroom. Alex stood there, watching him go, her mind racing. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about uncovering the truth. And if what he said was true, she might not be the only one in danger. Alex left the courtroom with her mind running in overdrive. Every instinct she had honed over the years screamed that something bigger was at play, something carefully orchestrated. That officer, he wasn't just lying to protect himself. He was terrified. But terrified of what? Or who? Her lawyer hurried to catch up with her, lowering his voice as they stepped outside. "Alex, this is getting dangerous. If this officer is scared, then we need to consider the possibility that pushing further could put you in real trouble." Alex exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "I faced worse," she said, "but I need to know the truth. Someone went through a lot of effort to frame me. They planted evidence, manipulated reports, and got a cop to perjure himself. Why? What's the end game?" Her lawyer sighed. "I don't know, but I have a feeling we're about to find out." As if on cue, Alexa's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her stomach tensing at the unknown number flashing on the screen. A part of her told her not to answer, but she ignored it. "Carter," she said, keeping her tone steady. A deep voice, distorted as if altered by software, spoke on the other end. "You don't know when to walk away." Alex's grip on the phone tightened. "And you don't know who you're dealing with." A low chuckle. "That's where you're wrong. We know exactly who you are. And that's why you need to stop." Alex's pulse remained steady, but her muscles tensed. "Or what?" There was a pause. Then the voice said, "Or you won't like what happens next." The line went dead. She lowered the phone slowly, her mind already analyzing every possibility. A threat. A warning. and confirmation that this wasn't just about one corrupt cop. This was an organized effort. Her lawyer's eyes widened slightly. That sounded bad. Alex tucked her phone away. It was. He exhaled sharply. So, now what? She looked ahead, her mind made up. Now we push harder. That night, Alex sat in front of her laptop, reviewing every piece of evidence she had collected so far. Court documents, witness statements, surveillance footage, anything that might give her a clue about who was pulling the strings. And then, after hours of searching, she saw it. A name. Buried in an old report tied to her case was a signature, one that didn't belong to anyone she had interacted with directly. It was subtle, almost hidden, but once she saw it, she couldn't ignore it. She quickly ran the name through the system. The result sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't just some random officer or low-level bureaucrat. This was someone with real influence, someone with power, and someone who had just made a critical mistake by leaving a trace. Alex leaned back, exhaling slowly. She had them. But now, they knew she was closing in. A sudden sound outside made her tense. She reached for the small pistol she kept nearby, instincts kicking in. Slowly, she moved toward the window, peering through the blinds. A black SUV sat parked just across the street, its engines still running. She couldn't see the driver, but she knew they were watching. A message. She had rattled them. She turned away from the window, her mind racing. They were getting desperate. That meant she was getting close. But it also meant things were about to get a lot more dangerous. She wasn't backing down. Whoever was behind this, whoever had framed her, lied in court, and now tried to intimidate her. They had just made their biggest mistake. Because now she wasn't just proving her innocence. She was coming for them. Alex took a steady breath, forcing herself to stay calm as she stepped away from the window. The black SUV across the street hadn't moved. It just sat there, humming softly, its presence an unspoken warning. But instead of fear, Alex felt something else rising inside her. Determination. She grabbed her phone and took a quick picture of the vehicle. If they wanted her to know she was being watched, fine. But she wasn't going to sit back and do nothing. She quickly sent the image to a trusted contact, someone from her Navy SEAL days who specialized in intelligence gathering. If anyone could find out who the vehicle was registered to, it was him. Her phone vibrated almost instantly. Asterisk saw the pic. Running it now. Be careful. Asterisk. Alex took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay patient. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. There was something deeper at play here. She could feel it. Lies like this didn't happen in isolation. Someone had wanted her behind bars. Someone had taken careful steps to make sure she was the one blamed. And whoever it was, they had used this officer as a tool to make it happen. Her lawyer leaned in close. "He's rattled," he murmured. "You saw the way he reacted to the footage. He wasn't just caught off guard, he was scared." Alex nodded, keeping her voice low. Because he knows this is bigger than just him, he wasn't acting alone. Her lawyer frowned. "You think there's someone else behind this?" "I know there is," she said. "The question is who?" Before her lawyer could respond, a voice cut through the noise. "Miss Carter." She turned to see a woman approaching. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, professional but with an air of authority that set her apart from the rest of the spectators. Alex immediately recognized her. Internal affairs. The woman stopped just a few feet away, giving Alex a measured look. "Can we talk?" Alex exchanged a glance with her lawyer before nodding. Of course. The woman led them out of the courtroom and into a quieter hallway. The moment they were out of earshot from the others, she spoke. "You should know, this case has drawn attention, and not just from the media." Alex folded her arms. Meaning? Meaning there are people in law enforcement who aren't happy with what just happened in there. Alex arched an eyebrow. Because the truth came out? The woman hesitated before nodding. Let's just say the officer testifying against you isn't the only one with something to lose. Alex narrowed her eyes. So what are you saying? That I should back off? The woman's expression remained unreadable. I'm saying that whoever set this up, they had power, and they had a reason for picking you. If you keep pushing, you might not like what you find. Alex held her gaze. She could see it in the woman's eyes. She wasn't threatening her. She was warning her. And yet, the idea of walking away wasn't even an option. "Appreciate the concern," Alex said calmly. "But I don't scare easily." The woman studied her for a moment before sighing. Then just be careful. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Alex and her lawyer standing in the hallway. Her lawyer ran a hand through his hair. Okay, that wasn't ominous at all. Alex's mind was already working through the possibilities. If internal affairs was already involved, that meant this case had drawn attention from higher up, which meant the corruption ran deeper than just one lying officer. And yet, something still didn't add up. If someone had framed her, why? What did they think locking her up would accomplish? And more importantly, who would benefit from it? She exhaled, pushing the questions to the back of her mind for now. "I need to talk to him," she said suddenly. Her lawyer blinked. "Who?" "The officer," she said, already turning back toward the courtroom. "He's hiding something, and I want to know what it is." Her lawyer hesitated before sighing. "I have a feeling this is going to get messy." Alex gave a small, humorless smile. "It already is." She walked back into the courtroom just as the officer was gathering his things near the witness stand. He saw her approaching and immediately straightened, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. But there wasn't one. "Officer," Alex said smoothly, stopping just a foot away from him. "We should talk." He scoffed, shaking his head. "I don't have anything to say to you." "I think you do," she said, lowering her voice just enough to make it clear she wasn't here to make a scene. "And I think you know that this case isn't going the way you planned." The officer swallowed hard but forced a smirk. "You think one piece of footage changes everything?" He leaned in slightly. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Alex tilted her head. "Then why don't you enlighten me?" His jaw clenched, his fingers twitching at his side. There was something in his eyes, something beyond anger or frustration. It was fear. "You think this is about you?" He muttered under his breath. "It's bigger than that. Bigger than me." Alex narrowed her eyes. "Then why take the fall for it?" Inside the warehouse, shadows danced on concrete walls as the dim light from a single hanging bulb revealed a tense scene. Her lawyer, a man whose calm smile now seemed forced and haunted, stood near a creaking wooden table. Detective Graves lingered in the background, a recording device clutched tightly in his hand. The air was thick with unspoken questions and the weight of betrayal. Alexa's eyes, hard and determined, never wavered as she stepped forward. "I know everything," she said softly, voice steady despite the fury burning inside her. "I know you were involved, and I have proof." Her lawyer's gaze flickered with a mix of regret and fear. "Alex, you have to understand. I never wanted it to come to this," he stammered, glancing at Graves as if seeking an ally. The recording device in Graves's hand clicked on, capturing every word. Alexa's heart pounded as she demanded, "Explain it to me then." "Who forced you into this?" Who's really behind framing me? The lawyer hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he admitted, I was blackmailed. The officer wasn't acting alone. There's someone in a higher position, a man who pulls the strings behind internal affairs. I was desperate. They threatened my family. I thought I could keep it contained, that I could help you from the inside by feeding you just enough evidence to mislead you. His voice cracked with remorse as he continued, but it spiraled out of control, and I had no choice but to follow their orders. Before Alex could press further, a distant sound of sirens echoed through the night, punctuating the already charged atmosphere. The tension in the warehouse escalated instantly. The lawyer's eyes widened, and he muttered, They know we're here. Alex's hand instinctively moved closer to the grip of her concealed weapon. The sound of heavy boots and muffled voices grew louder outside the building, and Detective Graves motioned for silence, his face grim. Suddenly, the warehouse door burst open, and a group of armed men poured in, their faces masked and their intentions unmistakably hostile. In the ensuing chaos, shots rang out, echoing off the cold walls. Alexa's training kicked in as she dove behind a stack of old crates, dodging bullets and calculating her next move with precision. The lawyer, desperate and panicked, tried to retreat, but one of the masked men grabbed him, shouting commands that were drowned out by the clamor of the conflict. Alexa's heart pounded as she moved quickly, pulling out her sidearm and engaging with the intruders. Amid the barrage of gunfire, she managed to secure the lawyer, forcing him to his knees. Tell me everything, now, she demanded, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. The lawyer's eyes brimmed with tears as he gasped. It's not just one man. It's an entire network. I was just a pawn. And Detective Graves. He coughed as another round shattered a nearby window. Graves was never on our side. In that moment, as if on cue, Detective Graves stepped forward. His expression shifted from concern to a cold, calculated stare. That's right, Alex, he said, his tone low and measured. I've been playing both sides all along. The words hit Alex like a sledgehammer. Betrayal by the man who had appeared to be her protector left her reeling. The masked intruders closed in, and chaos reigned as Alex realized that every piece of the puzzle was now more treacherous than she could have imagined. Alex's mind raced as she scrambled for cover, her instincts screaming to fight back. With remarkable focus, she assessed the situation. The lawyer, clearly terrified, began babbling about the true mastermind, a powerful figure within the Internal Affairs Division who had orchestrated the entire frame against her to cover up his own illicit operations. His confession spilled out in a torrent of fear and regret as he pleaded, I did it to protect my family. They said if I didn't cooperate, everything I love would be destroyed. Amid the chaos, the true mastermind's voice came through on a hacked communication channel. A distorted, authoritative tone warned, stand down or face the consequences. This is far from over. The message sent a chill down Alex's spine. In that moment, she realized the entire conspiracy was even larger and more dangerous than she had imagined. The officer, the shell company, even the betrayals, they were all part of a grand design to eliminate anyone who threatened the status quo. Alex's heart hammered as she took a deep breath and steadied herself. The betrayal by Detective Graves had been the final piece of the puzzle, a twist so unexpected that it left her reeling. The man who had appeared to help her, who had provided crucial evidence earlier, had been complicit in the elaborate scheme to silence the truth. With a swift motion, Alex disarmed one of the armed men who had attempted to grab her. Just as relief began to mix with the adrenaline, Alexa's phone buzzed one final time. It was a message from her command. A covert strike had been launched against the conspirators. coordinated by an elite task force within her Navy SEAL unit. The message was brief, but its urgency was unmistakable. This was the beginning of a new battle, one that would determine not just her fate, but the future of an entire corrupt network. In that final moment, as the van sped away into the night, and the weight of betrayal and loss settled in, Alex realized that even though the truth had finally come to light, the fight for justice was far from over. The unexpected twist of Detective Graves' double cross had changed everything, leaving her with one stark question. In a world where loyalties shift like sand, who could she truly trust? The answer remained hidden in the dark corners of the conspiracy, waiting to be uncovered in the battles yet to come. The van sped through the dimly lit streets, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on Alex's shoulders. The evidence in her pocket felt heavier than it should, as if it carried the burden of all the lives entangled in this corruption. The lawyer sat beside her, his hands cuffed, his eyes distant and filled with regret. He had betrayed her, but in the end, his conscience had forced him to do the right thing. That didn't mean she trusted him. She glanced out the window as the flashing lights of police cars faded behind them. Somewhere in the shadows, Detective Graves had disappeared, slipping through the cracks like a ghost. He was dangerous, unpredictable, and worse, he knew her moves. The betrayal stung more than she wanted to admit. He had played his role well, pretending to be on her side, helping her piece things together just enough to keep her from uncovering the full truth. But now she knew, and knowing meant she had the upper hand. The van pulled up to a secure facility, and Alex stepped out, her boots hitting the pavement with a sense of finality. A high-ranking officer approached her, his face unreadable. "We've gone through the files you sent," he said, his voice steady. "It's bigger than we thought. We've already made a few arrests, but there are more. We'll need you to testify." Alex nodded. She had known this wouldn't be over with just one battle. The corruption had run deep, infecting the system from the inside. The officer studied her for a moment before adding, "You did good, Lieutenant." It had been a while since someone had called her by her rank. She had spent so much time fighting this battle alone that she had almost forgotten who she was outside of it. The lawyer was led away, his fate now in the hands of the justice system. He had made mistakes, but he wasn't the root of the problem. He had been a pawn, just like she had been, at least for a while. Alex took a deep breath, feeling the exhaustion settle into her bones. She had been fighting for so long, but for the first time, it felt like the truth had finally won. Days passed, and with each new piece of evidence released, more arrests followed. Officers who had abused their power were taken into custody, their carefully crafted facades crumbling in front of the world. The public was outraged, demanding justice, and for once, the system seemed to be listening. The case had grown too big to be swept under the rug. The Navy intervened, ensuring that those responsible faced the full consequences of their actions. But one piece of the puzzle was still missing: Detective Graves. He had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions. Where had he gone? Who was helping him? And more importantly, would he return? Alex knew the answer before she even finished asking herself. He would. And when he did, she would be ready. One evening, as she walked through the quiet corridors of her base, her phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen, untraceable but unmistakable. It was from Graves. Asterisk, asterisk, you did well. But this isn't over, asterisk, asterisk. Alex stared at the message for a long time. A part of her had expected this. He was too smart to go down without a fight. But instead of fear, she felt something else: resolve. The game had changed, but she was still in it. And no matter how long it took, she would make sure justice was served. She deleted the message and slipped the phone into her pocket. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the war that had been fought in the shadows. For most, this was just another news story. For her, it was a reminder that the fight for truth never really ended. But for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself a moment of peace. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. And when the time came, she would be ready.